Okay. Hi, and I'm Charlotte Cagny, and I'm welcoming today for the Birth Confidence Summit. I'm welcoming Jo Bolden, who's a professional dancer and mother, and I'm very excited to have her talking about her journey with confidence and birth today. So,
Hi.
yeah. So the backstory, I've known Jo for a long time as we've both done some courses together, but we actually live on opposite sides of the world, don't we, Jo? You're from
We
Australia, we're in
do.
America, and I'm in the UK. But I think motherhood's like a universal journey, and I'd love to hear a bit about you. So you have one daughter, and how old
hmm
is she now? How old is she now?
10 months.
10 months. Wow.
hmm
And
hmm
so how was your journey to becoming a mother? I know it's something you wanted for a long time, and then
hmm
how did that go? How did you tell me more?
Uh, my journey was possibly a little different to most. We we had a donor for Tatum because I'm married to a woman. I'm in a same-sex marriage. So our journey to motherhood was very much the choices were things that we had to, we had to choose to show up. We had to choose to make an appointment to go in and see our fabulous team of um, I want to call them doctors, but I feel like it was more of a circle that we were standing in, of wonderful women who sort of helped us to the point that I fell pregnant. It was a confronting process at times, just because it's not the publicized, very visible journey to becoming pregnant. I feel like it's not what you read about in books as a kid. It's not. And I have spoken to a few friends that have either had to go an IVF route, and I have a friend who did an embryo adoption in order to become a mother, and I feel like they've had a similar journey where there's not as much dialogue, I guess, about less traditional ways of falling pregnant. And then once you're a mother, it's everybody's in the same boat. Then it doesn't matter how you became pregnant. But so that journey was quite a vulnerable one, to becoming pregnant. But then um, once pregnant, it's like so many things. It doesn't matter how I got to that point. Once pregnant, then the kinds of questions that came up, and um, the joys and the fears and the nervousness, or the concerns and the question marks and the unknownness of it all, I guess, is much like anybody else's experience.
Yeah. How did it feel? Were there many fears that came up, or did you feel confident throughout your pregnancy about giving birth?
Oh, no. I'd like to say that I did. It would feel great to say that, but at the same time, I found it really refreshing when I spoke to um, women who had become mothers or were pregnant at the same time as me, to feel like I was standing in the company of people who had also felt afraid or concerned. The unknown and the responsibility that I felt were big issues for me. But I'm a lifelong, well, I was going to say lifelong perfectionist. I like to think of myself as a reformed perfectionist these days. I don't subscribe to the same kind of thought patterns, I hope, as often as I used to. Um, but the idea that I was carrying a little life and responsible for um, this little being that was growing inside of me, I think some of the biggest things that came up for me, I guess, to do with choices, which is already a word that's come up. I was really possibly hyper aware at some time that the choices that I made while pregnant would inevitably affect this little being, and became quite nervous and afraid at times about, I guess, paranoid about not putting myself in any situations that would then in any way adversely affect. And there's the obvious things that people say to you about being pregnant, whether it be, the traditional list of do's and don'ts when it comes to eating, or um, we travel a lot for work. So when going through going through security, I was very, very clear that I was not walking through any of those machines. And different security agents tried to say to me at different times, oh no, this one's fine. I was staunchly refused and always insisted on, we have to give you a pat down. And I'd say, well, it's completely fine. I'd prefer that. That's very human to me. I don't want to walk through any of those machines. There are a lot of things I noticed. I would get myself quite worked up about always making the right choice. When it comes to listening to my body, though, so I think I was concerned about things that I would come into contact to and a little bit hyper vigilant. But when it actually comes to what I felt really comfortable with, I was very clear about that too. So apparently I had a very clear picture of what made me nervous, but also when it came to dancing, for example, which is, as you mentioned, what I do for a living. I danced right up until, 8.5 months pregnant. I was rolling on the floor. And in consultation we worked with a midwife for right up until she wasn't available when I went into labor. But beyond my 10-week appointment, we saw a midwife, which was a really positive thing for us. But she just said, look, you don't go starting anything new. Don't go skydiving, or if that's not habitually what your body is conditioned to do. But she said, if you're feeling great and dancing is what your body is used to, then carry on, continue doing what feels right for you. Maybe don't go flying through the air, but which, was something that was fairly easy to avoid. But I felt great, to the point where people would say, is Joe okay to be rolling on the floor and dancing as full out as she is? And a couple of friends of mine said, yep, that's just how she does. Interestingly enough, the way that played out with Tatum when she was born, she loves music, but then music has always played when she was pregnant. And when she would be upset, my mum was here just after her birth, and she would do quite small little bounces. And I would say to her, Mum, that's not going to cut it. You've got to make, really quite big movements to soothe her, because I said, I guess that's my fault, so to speak. The big movement she was doing, with me while I was pregnant, just became something that she was used to and then became soothing for her.
I love that. I know
Yeah.
someone else's child who once used to fall asleep to, I think it was Neighbours or Coronation Street theme tune. Whenever they were upset, they could put that on, because that was what they did during pregnancy to relax. They were really busy working. The only time they got to relax was that. So they would put their feet up, lie down, relax, and the baby learned that was what you could hear when you relaxed. And so that was what they did after the baby was born. And you've got I think I think that's quite cool, the dancing and big movement.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And they learned that was to relax. And
we had the birth ball, and I would sit on it and bounce to the point that I'm sure it looked nerve-wracking for anybody watching me, but it was literally what she was used to, that big movement. She shrug off anything tiny, because that was never how I moved when I was pregnant. So yeah.
I think that points to something that comes up in a lot of interviews, that as the mother, you know what's okay for your body. We can sometimes check, like you did with a midwife or an expert, but she was confirming to you, trust your body, trust what feels right to you, what you're used to. And we can do so much more than we're conditioned to be not so active, but you're fit and strong and active, and you could keep doing that and just listen to your body. And it sounds really great. I imagine that would have really helped you for the labour and birth as well, to be strong and active. And
very much so. I remember they said to me early on, when I went for my 12-week ultrasound, the doctor said I must have made a joke about my age being what they term, I don't know if it's the same in the UK, what they term here in the States as advanced maternal age. And I made reference to it. And the doctor said, why is that I get women in here so obsessed with their age? I said, I'm not. I said, but the instant that I became pregnant and they sort of started, I guess, a chart for me, they've kept saying it to me. Oh, you're high risk because of your age, and we have to put you in this category because of this or because of that. And it was one of those things where he didn't realize it. He was saying, oh, I hadn't really thought of it that way. I said, well, I feel fine. It's more what I'm being told. He said, well, I wouldn't call you high risk at all based on your level of fitness. And it was interesting what you were just saying about feeling comfortable in your body, just how much of that rings true. And it's often what's projected at you and on you that causes for me, my mind to go into a spiral, where my heart and my body They knew they were doing fine. You know, they were doing what women have done for centuries, growing a human without really any effort from me, just that I rest, that I eat well, you know, that I look after myself. But I found that a lot of that was sort of, I guess, projected
Mhm.
more than coming up for me. And I took different things on. I kept dancing because that's what felt right. And it was said to me, I must have asked, I think, my midwife at some point about labor, and she just said, look, it's great for you if you can keep walking, if you can just, you know, keep that gentle activity the whole way through in a way that can keep your body, you know, doing what it does well. And I kept walking right up to the point I was hiking. When I say hiking, it's what they call it here, but essentially walking a nature trail the morning that I went into labor. I was actually thinking to myself, it feels really difficult today. Probably I was in the early stages of labor and I didn't even realize. I was like, see, why is this hill so steep? But I guess I listened to that, to the stuff that resonated with me. Walk a lot, which is great. I love walking anyway. So it's also, for me, walking is a bit of a moving meditation, where I struggle with sort of seated meditation, but walking has always been a go-to for me to quiet my mind and just connect with my body. So every part of that made sense. And my labor itself actually went wonderfully well. And I attribute that to how active I stayed, for me, for me and my body, how active I was able to stay. My body just kind of kicked into gear and had stayed, I guess, strong where it needed to be strong, and had softened where it needed to soften, in order for that to go well.
That's really beautiful. I think there's a lot of key points in what you said about how you chose what was right for you, essentially,
Mm,
and
mm,
ultimately found ways to ignore what was projected at you. Like the advanced maternal age thing is like one I just, you know, especially with the case of you who got a younger body, a fitter body than someone who could be much younger, but not looked after it, not looked after
mm.
the body or so on. But again, it doesn't help to hear that when you
No,
might
it really doesn't.
about something, like particularly when they class you as high risk, and then if your care changes from that, or you have to then say no to things. I mean, I was 42 when I had my third.
Mm,
So I was well over the scale of advanced geriatric maternal age, whatever they want to
mm, mm,
call it.
mm.
So yeah, and that was fine. I mean, there may be some, you know, as you get older, maybe, I mean, I found the pregnancy a bit harder, like physically, but of the third child though. So that may
Right.
have been it more than my age, you know, like I just don't know. So
No. Well, I was 40 when I had Tatum, and she's my first. And I guess I don't know. I don't know. I have nothing to compare it to, but the pregnancy felt great to me. You know,
yeah.
I was tired in moments, but that's nothing, you know, in terms of, you know, I had no morning sickness at all. There were a couple of mornings where I said to my wife, I feel like I had a bottle of tequila last night. So I guess I guess this is maybe a little morning sickness I'm experiencing, but that was, you know, I had just a couple of mornings of feeling not great, but that was it. And I believe from what the 12-week ultrasound doctor told us, he was wonderful, because he just said to me, look, you know, he said exactly, he echoed your sentiments exactly. And I think what we found was the system labeled me high risk, but we found individuals in the system who spoke more the language, that said, hey, look, he said to me, you're a fantastic candidate for a healthy pregnancy. He said everything about, you know, your heart rate, the way your body's responding to the pregnancy, means that you could be 23 and unhealthy and have far more, like be flagging far more concerns for me than where you're at with the pregnancy that you have. Um, I feel like it was definitely a system thing, because the midwife that we found by accident, but I don't really believe in coincidence. I feel like that was meant to be my obstetrician that we had, who was lovely, but she got a job elsewhere and moved on. And we then saw a midwife the entire time, and she was very non-alarmist, very, very chill and relaxed, you know, aware of things. But it's so interesting to me. I had a blood test at some point, and something obviously flagged in the blood test, and the way that the system dealt with it versus her as an individual was very clear to us at the time. and kept telling us to seek out the individuals and that eventually we would find them, that they would be brought to us if we kept believing that they were there. Because the American system meant that my blood test went from the doctor to, she sent it to somebody else and I got this random phone call from a genetic specialist, a senior genetic specialist, saying, oh, something has flagged in your blood test and I'm calling to have a phone call with you. And I said, oh, I don't know anything about this. Is this something that my doctor should have maybe aware of? And he said, oh, well, I'm not going to talk to you about it until you've spoken to your doctor. I said, well, she's away on a holiday right now. Oh, well, I can't talk to you about it. So you get off the phone call, off a phone call like that where you have no answers. Well, also it sent me into a bit of a tailspin of what do they need to talk to me about that they can't talk to me about because the system says I have to go. And eventually I just made an appointment with the midwife and she said, oh, look, apparently I still had and still have fetal hemoglobin, which is very rare and unusual, but is nothing threatening. She said, in order for that to have been a concern in any way, there would have to have been a number of things that flagged in order for that to be a concern that signified it was some other condition. But she said, that's the only thing that's showing here. That's of no concern to me. In order for that to have been anything concerning, there would have been, other things that pointed to a question mark or a concern. It was just so interesting that that's how she dealt with so many things. And she was just a great fit for us. She referred me to an acupuncturist at one point. She helped us find our doula. We had a doula. She just was very not what I expected, I guess, of what I had heard about the American medical and healthcare system, which had me very nervous because it is such a huge, it feels very corporate. So coming from Australia where everything had felt much more personal to me, I was a little nervous about not wanting to be sort of chewed up and spat at, I guess, by the system and wanting to have the birth experience that I wanted, but also the way that health insurance works in this country. That meant that there were certain parameters that, if I wanted to have the benefit of my health insurance, I guess I had to work within a certain amount of sort of system limits that felt like they were imposed, but we were able to seek out, I guess, the people, and they showed up for us, and we just kept believing that they would find us. So even right up until going into the hospital, and I knew I was going in, at a time when my midwife was not scheduled to be on, and I knew she wouldn't be available to us on that day, but I just kept trusting that the right people would find us, and they did. So that was great.
Well, it's very unusual in America to have a midwife so much and a doula, and it's really wonderful that you had such perseverance seeking out the right people, which speaks a lot, I think, to getting what you want in that way. Quite determined. Yeah,
I was very determined, I think is the right word. I was determined that they were there. Having found one or two of them, I thought, right, this might feel like a very big system and I might feel a little bit overwhelmed by the process. But right up until my I hope it's not, I was going to use the word premature. That feels like a totally appropriate word when we're talking about birth, but of me to mention it. But if you have any other questions, but right up until the day I went into labor, I had been told, your water won't break first. That never happens. It only happens, in 11% of cases, and it won't be dramatic like the movies where it's a gush. Well, it was. It was all of those things. It was dramatic, and it did happen first. And thankfully, I was in my own living room. But, we had planned to labor at home and only go into the hospital when we were much closer. But because my water broke first, I knew we had taken a childbirth education course, which was wonderful. So I knew then that the hospital would tell me I was at a greater risk of infection, but I also knew we'd been sort of vigilant and we'd done our research as to what to do and not do. I knew not to go and sit in the bath or anything like that with my water having broken, but I couldn't feel Tatum moving anymore. So I had a glass of orange juice and I lay down thinking, well, hopefully the sugar from the orange juice would stimulate her, but I couldn't feel anything. So I was a little bit concerned. So we did go into the hospital just to make sure she was fine. But having gone in, they weren't going to let me come home again because my water had broken. So we were a bit concerned, and but we had done the childbirth education course, and I guess I want to say armed ourselves with a lot of information, but it wasn't really an armor. It was more, we just made sure that we were really informed. So when the first, I think it was a resident as opposed to the attending physician came in, and he said, oh, well, we need to do an examination. I said, actually, I'd like to say no to that at this point, because I know that the risk of infection goes up a great deal more once I have an examination. So unless there's an absolute need for one, I'd like to wait on that. And when the attending physician came in, she said, that's fine. You know, it was just interesting. So that first resident, I think, wanted to be a little bit more by his book, so to speak. And when the attending physician came in, she said, no, you're totally well within your rights to say no to that. And I can see why you would. And you obviously have the information you need. And I said, well, look, I've gone into labor and my water is broken, but I want to know I'm not on the clock. It's really important to me. I want to try and have this baby naturally with no medication. But I know that having come in here, I don't want to feel like you're watching the clock and you're going to tell me, okay, well, in 1 hour, if this hasn't sort of gotten into gear, then we're going to need to give you Pitocin or something like that. And I said, I want to know that can I have some time to walk the corridors to see if I can encourage this labor to sort of happen on its own. And we just kept gently saying that. And eventually she said, you know what, that's fine. If you stay and don't go home, I'll find you a little room right at the end of a corridor where you won't be too bothered by us. We'll just come in and put the fetal monitor on every now and then to make sure everything's fine. And that's exactly what they did. And they left us for, 12 hours. We had this beautiful room with a view of the garden. And I said to my wife, you sleep. This is your moment. Enjoy your sleep now, because I'm going to need you later on. And I walked laps. I put my jacket on because it was a bit chilly in the hospital. And I just walked laps and laps and laps of the corridors. And to try, and it did, it brought the labor on more, not as much as we were hoping to start with, but having a lot of information about what we would be offered and alternatives to that actually became really important to us, even as the labor progressed further on. At one point they said, oh, look, it's not going as quickly as we would like to have seen, that your body was going to be a little bit more into active labor by now, which is not something we would have had to deal with if we were laboring at home with our doula. But they said, would you consider some Pitocin? I said, well, I'd prefer not to. So what are my alternatives to that? And they said, well, you can do nipple stimulation. And I said, well, what's that? And they said, it's exactly what it sounds like. So I said, well, okay, how long do I do that for? They said 20 minutes. I said, great, we'll give it a shot. Because I would, if that's obviously the non-invasive and non-medical way to see if I can, move into a more active labor. 20 minutes later, there I was in full active labor with no Pitocin, and a body that was just doing what it needed to do without, with minimal, I guess, extras, and it wasn't necessary. My body was able to get there on its own.
That's wonderful. So great that you could ask for that, because the system doesn't offer you that first, no, it never really does. It could offer the non-invasive things first, and when you've exhausted those or exhausted other methods, it's kind of that way around. And it sounds like you did a really great job of tuning in and honoring what was really important to you.
I feel like, having done a lot of research, we also took a course with a lady that we found via my midwife, and it was a 9-week childbirth education course, and we went every Tuesday night, and it was a lot of information, but I felt like we knew they were going to offer Pitocin to bring on the labor. I felt I wasn't afraid that I didn't have the information, and I felt like because I was able to anticipate what they might offer me, and I knew what it was, and I knew what the I guess consequences were of certain choices. I know that when you say yes to one of those things, you're also saying yes to a whole bunch of other things that are potentially going to go hand in hand and are necessary for some people. But I knew if it wasn't necessary for me, that I I was going to be less, I guess, at the mercy of just what they were offering and trusting that what they were offering were my only options. I felt like we had done quite a bit of our own looking into um, what a hospital birth would look like and what the steps are that they would take. So when we got to those steps, I felt like we said, well, what else can you offer us? And I knew that I could say no to an examination, unless it was absolutely necessary, to an internal examination, unless it was absolutely necessary, which, I mean, I think the first time I was checked I was 7 centimeters dilated, and that was the first time they checked. And I also knew that dilation and the rate at which I dilated wasn't necessarily an indicator of how quickly or not quickly I was going to get to sort of the next stage of labor, because we'd gotten so much information. At 7 centimeters, I was getting a little bit tired. I said to Teeny, Christina, but we call her Teeny, I said, I don't know if I can do this. I'm tired now. And because I went into labor, or my water broke at 11:30 at night, I'd been awake all day, and then I'd walked through the night because I wanted to bring it on naturally. So I was just tired. I just said to him, if I could just have a sleep. I said, maybe if this is going to go on for hours and hours and hours beyond now, maybe I'll consider that epidural. So they sort of flagged it on my chart, I guess, considering an epidural. But at that point, the anaesthetist was working on a C-section. So he wasn't available, which is really good, because at 7 centimeters, our doula, as my labor kind of progressed very quickly, so she hadn't gotten there yet, because we were saying, oh, it's taking ages. Don't worry, take your time getting here. And she was on the phone to Christina, and she just said, put her in the shower. Just put her in the shower, because the shower was one of my regular practices too. When I was pregnant, it was a way I could get relief. My back got a little bit sore. It's a bit of a meditation thing for me too, is to stand in a warm shower. So I got in the shower, and Christina put a bathing suit on, got in with me. And they were wonderful about that. And our midwife too had guided us when choosing the exact location, the hospital, because we had choices under our health insurance. She had said to us that the location that we chose on Sunset Boulevard, on an iconic boulevard in Hollywood of all places, she said they're really quite open to progressive. They're open-minded when it comes to birth. They'll let you jump in the shower. We had fairy lights up in the room. We had all the lights off. We had, those flameless candles burning, or not burning, but switched on. We had music playing the whole time. And we very much had sort of created, I had my mala beads, 2 strings of mala beads the whole time, because I'd wanted to have those. We had a vision board. We brought our baby vision board of what that we had created about what we had hoped my pregnancy and birth and motherhood would look and feel like. And I jumped in the shower at 7 centimeters, and 20 minutes later, I said, I feel like I have to push. And a relief nurse had come in at that point. And she said, oh, you can't push. You're only 7 centimeters. And then at that point, our regular nurse, right? 20
Because you're not going to change, right, at all ever, because you were measured then. So you don't change until they measure again, and then it just happens instantly.
Right. But our regular nurse came back in, and she was wonderful. And she said, actually, you know what, do you mind if I check you again to see if anything's changed after 20 minutes in the shower? I said, nope, I feel fine about that, because I'm really feeling the urge to push. And I had gone in 20 minutes from 7 to 9.5 centimeters dilated. And at that point, I remember standing there, and at that point there were 2 nurses, and Christina and my doula had just come in, and the anaesthetist came in, and he said, does she want the epidural? And I looked at one of the nurses, and she said, sweetheart, you don't come this far without help. You don't do all this work. She said, trust me, you can do this. You can do this. And she said, by the time we give you the epidural, chances are the baby will be, by the time it takes effect, she'll be here. So I said, no, I'm fine. At that point, they'd been wonderful. I'd done most of my labor standing. I hadn't wanted to sit. We had the birth ball and everything, but I had done most of my labor standing. I wanted to stand during the contractions. And it was only at that point they said, can we get you? I was tired, and they said, can we get you on the bed? Would you feel comfortable with that? And then they were great. It wasn't, pretty much not that, it felt like a moment later I was, into the pushing. And it was funny you talking about me being a dancer, because one of the things I remember most was my doula holding my hands and counting me into and out of the contractions. I was just concentrating on her voice and nothing else. I wasn't even really thinking about the baby that was going to be at the end of my pushing journey. At that point, the only thing I could think about was getting to the end of each contraction and how many counts I had left, because being a dancer, the counting, it's always such a, it's a way of, it's like, I always say, it's when I'm choreographing, it's the way of shortening the distance between myself and the dancers is to measure out, this is on 1 and this is on 2. It's a way of communicating the choreography to them, is to break it into pieces. So I felt like I was breaking each contraction into pieces by using the counts. And the only time I got cranky or outwardly cranky with anybody during the labor was when it was right before I think Tatum was born, and they had said, look, we want to take it a little bit more slowly. At some point we're going to get you only to, instead of counting to 10, we're going to count to 3. And then, and then we'll go back to doing our counting to 10. And I remember saying, wait, you have to tell me how many counts. You can't tell me 3 counts or 10 counts. Which one? Which one is it? What do you want me to do? Which one? I can't do both. And I think it was the only moment I got cranky with anybody was just tell me how many counts and when I'm supposed to be doing them, which is very dancer of me to be attached to. I want to get that right. Just tell me exactly what my counts are, and then I will work towards those. In terms of being a dancer too, I felt like you know your body really well. And so when they would say, okay, we want you to, I hadn't really understood what a friend of mine had said to me, but when it came to push, they had said to me, we want you to push to this place. This is where we want you to focus the pushing. Because of course I'd never given birth before. I didn't really know if I would understand where my focus should be, or what I was, where I'll be pushing sort of down to. But being a dancer, she sort of said, okay, I want you to push to this point. Can you feel my fingers? If I put my fingers here, can you? And I said, yes, I can actually. And I felt like, as you do when you're a dancer and you sort of send off your information to the different muscles you want to fire, I felt like that's exactly what happened for me. I was able to go, right, well, now I know what you're asking of me. I'm going to send the information to those specific muscles. And it very much made sense.
Yes, you had a great relationship with your body. I think that sounds like it really helped you to know your body well.
Definitely.
In a way. It sounds like a beautiful birth experience that is quite unusual.
It really was.
Beautiful.
Yes. And it was natural, and I definitely attribute the walking and the staying active, because I only pushed for 12 minutes when it actually came to the pushing, which I didn't realize, but apparently is a very short amount of time to be pushing for. I mean, I feel like I had no concept of how long it was taking at the time, because you're just in the zone. You could have told me I was there for 7 hours. I would have said, okay, sure, it was 7 hours. But yeah, apparently it was only 12 minutes. And then she was here, and I felt really excited at that point that I had been able to honor what I had hoped for. And I know it's not always the case. I had friends who had hoped for a natural birth, and then things didn't progress how they had wanted them to, but we had been able to maintain the space that I had wanted to maintain, and I had her naturally, and very alert when she was born. And I also felt very awake. I was high as a kite on life. I felt like I felt like Superwoman. It was really, I'll never forget that sense of, I wish I could have bottled that feeling of feeling capable of anything, feeling like I just gave birth. I can do anything. Women are incredible. I had no idea that, that this was possible. And Tatum was really alert, and she fed after 20 minutes. She was hungry, so she latched on after 20 minutes of being born. And then I remember saying to them, I'm starving. They said, what? I said, I am so hungry. I've just run a marathon. They said, well, they'll bring you, dinner once you move to the postpartum suite. I said, I know I'm still in the labor delivery suite, but can I have my dinner now? I was so hungry after going through that, running that marathon. but it was, and I felt, I got up and they said, well, you have to go to the toilet first. I said, great. Where is it? Point me in that direction. They said, you feel all right to get up? I said, I feel fine. I feel great. I'm a bit sore, but nothing compared to where I was in the middle of a contraction. This is fine. It was not what we had anticipated. I had anticipated a lot more. I had worried through the pregnancy about feeling part of a system and not being able to create the people and that we wanted, but we just kept holding to it and created our vision boards and kept believing that it was possible. And I believe that then the right people found their way into that room with us,
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And have you felt that? Have you felt that's changed you since? I know you said that you felt like you could do anything. Have you noticed that filtering into your life and your work since then, as you've become a mother?
It has. It definitely has. For a while, I felt, it's like you've been living your life in this universe that you think is huge and expansive, and then someone knocks the wall of that universe down. This is how it felt to me becoming a mother, and you're like, I had no idea there was another whole side to this universe that I thought I was living in. It took me a while I didn't know how to be that and also continue being the me that I'd always known myself to be. It took me a while to integrate the two, but I definitely feel like that. Remember that I can do anything has come up for me a few times. It's I would, like I said, I wish I could have bottled that euphoric feeling that I had felt. I'm sure it was the oxytocin and a few things going on in there, but there were definitely some moments when I guess that initial euphoria wore off that were a bit harder. There were some challenging moments about, I think for me, the hardest thing was the stillness is hard for me. I'm a mover by trade, and just in life, I like to move. So the stillness of being at home with a newborn baby for me was difficult. I think probably more mentally than anything. And that's where sort of, I guess, my biggest struggles were. And I would have liked a little bit more of that feeling had I been able to bottle it just as a reminder, but it definitely comes back. Possibly when I least expect it, I am reminded of what's possible. I am reminded of just what we're capable of, but we persist in forgetting that so often. As women, as humans, but as women, I feel like I and others that I've spoken to forget that regularly, and then remember.
Yeah.
I have those moments when I just remember.
Amazing, really. It's really, I love that story. I really enjoyed hearing it. Thank you for sharing it in so much detail. And did you use any of the tools? I know we both used the tools, like clearing. Were they helpful for you to have those tools during pregnancy or labor at all?
Absolutely. The number of times I ran NPA, when non-personal awareness, when things would come up, compassion. I used a lot of compassion key, when fears would come up, and they would, I would feel them sort of take a bit more of a hold of me than I was happy for them to, more space than I was happy for them to occupy. I found myself definitely digging into the work that I had done way before even thinking about being pregnant, but just how that played out. I felt like I was able then to hold the space and trust too, I think. Trust that even in the moments when I couldn't work out how I was going to be able to create the atmosphere or the energy that I wanted, going back to the little tools that have always worked for me in the past, and that have reminded me to stay grounded. So many of those practices, and I'm sure some of them are really clear to me and have a label, like the non-personal awareness or the compassion key, but there are many more about just sitting with my body and feeling what I'm feeling and trusting that just holding that feeling while it's there and then letting it pass. There are even more I don't think that I have a word for, that I have learned from the courses that we've taken together, and just from little things that I've you standing in those circles of women, as we have, little things that people have thrown out at different times about what have worked for them. I feel really grateful that I had a range of tools that I could lean into at different times, because it's a wild ride for sure. Being a mum and being pregnant, I think one of the biggest helps for me has been the transparency and the vulnerability that I have learned. Hearing you talk about your business even so long ago, and your passion, and I thought of you a number of times while I was pregnant, and different conversations, while they weren't necessarily something I could relate to at the time, being pregnant and being a new mum. I feel like even having heard friends and other women talk about their struggles, and knowing that it was okay to struggle in certain moments, that it wasn't all going to feel like a fairy tale, that it wasn't going to look like the beautiful pictures on my vision board all the time, of a blissful, easeful motherhood experience all the time, that there would be times where I was tired, and it was okay that I was feeling tired, or, that there were just times when, it would just not necessarily unfold like a picture book story. And I think that the transparency and the vulnerability to talk about that, and to understand that that too is part of the motherhood journey, I think made a big difference to me.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I think we've answered most of our questions. I know, I forgot all about the questions. What would be your vision for the future of birth and motherhood, if you had a vision for that?
I'd love to see more women have the choices that I feel like I had, to know that the information is available um, in two particular areas. One, that there is some information out there. There are courses you can take, that there are people like yourself that you can talk to about all the options that are available to you, particularly when you are in labor and in um, or in pregnant and in the system, so to speak, that you can have a midwife, and that it's, as she kept saying to me, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not sick, you're pregnant. I'm not going to treat you like a sick person. You're having a baby. This is wonderful. Um, all the way to understanding my options when it came to being offered Pitocin, that I could say, actually, what else can I have before that? Because I had a friend who said, I didn't even know that that was an option for me. They just gave me Pitocin because they told me that's what was next. I would love to see pregnancy not medicalized so much. And while I'm grateful that there are options for people who need them, for someone like myself, that that it unfolded in a way that I could maintain a natural birth, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see more women know that that's there and that's available, and feel like they have information, that they are key when it comes to the birth, rather than feeling like they have to hand it over to a medical professional and feel, I guess, disempowered is the word that I'm looking for. I'd love to see more women feel empowered in pregnancy and in their labor and births. And I think more light shining on the ups and downs of being a mum in those first really intense weeks and months, because I know that was it was just a godsend to me at times that there were people starting to have conversations around. I guess it's less around what's easy, because what's easy and joyful is a delight already, but it helped me navigate some of the moments that felt really hard, or where I felt really alone, or it's the middle of the night and you feel like you're the only person in the world that's still up. Um, I felt like I think there could be even more transparency and light around the fact that it's a vulnerable time, and there's so much expectation, I think, that we put on ourselves, and that we're able to mother without flinching and without it affecting anything else that we do career wise and anything like that. And I have observed that. I've been in conversations about that before being a mother, but of course you can't experience it until you're in it. And then I became really grateful for the conversations that are there, but I think more of that in the future would reach more people. I'm lucky to stand in the circle that I stand in, but not everybody has a circle like mine, or tools like I have, or been a party to the conversations that I've been a part of. I'd love to see more women have that available to them.
Beautiful, thank you. And what would you suggest as a starting point for someone who's just really feeling terrified of giving birth?
Starting point, find your people, because they're out there. That's what I would say. If I could speak to myself in my most terrified moments, it was finding my people, so that I wasn't alone with those fears, somebody that could hold a space for them. Became really important to me not to deny them. At one point, I even wrote down what my biggest fear was, and they had us do that in the childbirth education course that I did as well, to write down the thing I was most afraid of, just so it wasn't rattling around on the inside of my head and taking up space in my body that I wanted to sort of keep clear, I guess, and give air to them, because spoken out loud, they're able to be more diffused. And find your people, because I know that those fears left unchecked can sort of, I guess, take a hold. And a lot of them, I think, are anticipating what you can't possibly know. That was the hard part. Is it going to hurt? My fear was around, I think my biggest fear was that there would be something wrong with the baby that was my fault, that there would have been a choice that I made somewhere in pregnancy that had led to there being, I damaged the baby somehow. I was, spoken by a true reformed perfectionist, that I would somehow have hurt the baby unintentionally. That was what my biggest fear was around. But I know some of the other women in my childbirth education circle, for them it was tearing. They were terrified of tearing, and that it would be so painful. And but spoken out loud in a place where we were all then able to talk about it, didn't dissipate the fears entirely, but I guess not being alone with them and being able to talk through them, and then, talking about the realities of tearing, or I guess you could get some information then that made it all less, took the power out of the fear, and I guess empowered you with more information around it. It gave you some more realities, for me anyway.
Yeah, wonderful. It's really beautiful. So thank you so much for all of that. And I wonder, if maybe we could finish with, like, if there was any final one thing you would love every woman to know who's on the journey to motherhood, what would that be?
I feel like it's twofold. One, it's so worth it. Coming from someone who didn't know if she would want children until I did, and then pursued it. And it's so worth it. It's such a gift. And I feel like it's it cuts through so much of the junk that I feel like hangs out in our lives of what we're meant to do with them and how life is supposed to unfold, and just reminds us of what it has for me, reminded me of who I really am. And as humans, what we're really capable of. It has deepened. It's deepened my connection with myself. It's deepened my connection with the world. I feel like it just kind of knocked out a whole wall of my universe, like I said, and went, hey, I know you think you've been living a really full life, and it is full and it is colorful, but there's also this whole, whole set of feelings that you didn't even know existed. Yeah.
Super. Thank you. That's really inspiring. I've just got this image of this wall and these big fields and the sunshine. And it's really great to hear that, because it's like it's that even when it's challenging, it's still that.
It is.
And it's hard sometimes, but it's glorious. So it's really great to feel your energy on that.
I feel like too, if you don't mind my jumping in, it's exactly what you just said. It's hard and also glorious. And I didn't know that those two things could occupy the same space. Yeah, I think I thought you either were having a hard day or a great day prior to being a mum. And now I understand that I can hold space for both at the same time. There are some days where, Charlotte, I've had moments when my wife was away for the week and Tatum was 3 months old, and I stood in the kitchen and cried when she napped because, I just went, well, this is taking a lot, it was a sleepless night, and I just felt like, it was a fussy day and nothing was getting done except for mothering. No, not showering. I think I was managing to eat and keep my baby alive and cared for. And then, she'd smile, or they reach up and touch your face, and and it's exquisite, and and I'm wiping the tears off at the same time. It's exactly what you just said. Incredibly, daunting and glorious, all in the same space.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time sharing the interview. I've really enjoyed it. It's so wonderful to hear that story. Such a wonderful, inspiring story. It feels like the embodiment of confidence for me in a way, what you're saying, because you may have, you've acknowledged you had fears, you had challenges, but ultimately you listened to what you wanted, what was important to you, and you made it happen with all those things that you've shared, which could be really valuable for people listening who may not have thought of those ideas until they heard them from you. So thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to share. Thank you.